All of us face two kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, like a work deadline. Inner expectations, like a New Year's resolution. And depending on whether your tendency is to meet or resist outer and inner expectations, that's what makes you an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. This is where people like you and me get into trouble. Because we say to people, this is freedom. Here it is, do it my way. I've got it figured out. If you would just do what I do, it's going to be amazing. Hey, and if you can't do it my way, I don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe you need to try harder. And then people start saying like, well, if it's easy for Gretchen and Scott, it should be easy for me. What's wrong with me? I'm not a real grown-up. Maybe I have no self-esteem. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I have no willpower. So it's really helpful to know how you fit in, because you can see like, well, how do I make the most of my tendency, and how, if I'm experiencing some kind of limitation or weakness, can I offset it?
You have a very good model for personalities and how maybe people can leverage and utilize this to not feel stuck, to maybe move forward. Walk us through some of that so that our guests can, everybody needs this from time to time, right?
Yes.
Knowing ourselves better can always be a benefit.
Absolutely. Okay. And Scott, I want to know what you are. So you're going to have to reveal your personality type.
Okay.
If you can tell. So I'm going to describe this, and it's called the 4 tendencies. And it's what you're figuring out is if you're an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. They say there are two kinds of people in the world: the kind of people that like to divide people into two kinds of people, and the kind of people who don't. I'm the kind of people who does. And I'm going to describe this. And listen, I mean, from just this brief description, most people know what they are, the people around them. We could do people on TV. I can do Game of Thrones characters. I can do The Office. These are very obvious to see once you know what you're looking at. But if you are the kind of person who likes to take a quiz and likes to get an answer, if you go to my website, GretchenRubin.com, it's free. Like, I don't know, 3.5 million people have taken this quiz now. But again, most people don't even have to take the quiz, because once I describe it, it's so obvious. And it sounds boring, because the question, the central question is, how do you respond to expectations? But I promise it gets juicy. Okay, so stay with me. So all of us face two kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, like a work deadline. Inner expectations, like a New Year's resolution. And depending on whether your tendency is to meet or resist outer and inner expectations, that's what makes you an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. So upholders are people who readily meet both outer and inner expectations. So they meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important, maybe more important. They tend to love to-do lists, scheduling. They're very good at execution. They don't need a lot of accountability or supervision. They can be rigid. I say this as an upholder myself. So their motto is, discipline is my freedom. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. They need reasons, justifications, rationale. They tend to love to do research. They love to customize. So what they're doing is, if something meets their inner expectation, if it makes sense to them, they'll do it no problem. If it doesn't make sense to them, they will push back. They're often told they ask too many questions. They can sometimes suffer analysis paralysis, because their need for perfect information makes it hard for them to make a decision or move forward. So their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why. Then there are obligers. And obliger, by the way, is the biggest tendency for both men and women. This is the tendency that the biggest number of people fit into. So obligers are the people who readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. These are the people who say, why is it I can always keep my promises to other people, but I can't keep my promises to myself? And I'm here to say, it is not a matter of making yourself a priority or taking time for self-care or self-esteem. What you need is outer accountability, even for an inner expectation. You want to read more? Join a book club. You want to exercise? Work out with a trainer who's annoyed if you don't show up. Work out with a friend who's annoyed if you don't show up. Raise money for a charity. Think of your duty to your future self. Take your dog for a run, who gets so disappointed if he doesn't get to go for his run. There are a million ways to create outer accountability once you realize that is what you need, even for an inner expectation. Obligers make great team members, great leaders, great friends, great family members, because they are the people who go the extra mile. They are the type O that pairs up the most easily in romance and work with the other 3 tendencies. But they're annoyed with themselves because they're like, why am I meeting everybody else's expectations, but I'm failing my expectations for myself? So their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then finally, the rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They can do anything they want to do. They can do anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically they don't tell themselves what to do. Like they don't sign up for the 10 a.m. yoga class on Saturday because they think, well, I don't know what I'm going to want to do on Saturday. And just the idea that something's on my calendar and someone's expecting me to show up is going to annoy me. So their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. So these are the four. Rebel is the smallest tendency. Obliger is the biggest tendency. Second largest is questioner. So if you're thinking about a curriculum or like you're selling to customers or whatever, most people are going to be obligers and questioners. Rebel is a small, very conspicuous group, but it's small. And my tendency, the upholder tendency, is only slightly larger. And I remember saying to my husband, I just realized I'm part of like this extreme fringe personality type. And he's like, do you think? Because he was not surprised. Okay, Scott. So do you have a sense of what your tendency is? Reveal.
I do. I think I am an upholder. I'm a discipline is freedom kind of person, but I've got a little rebel in me. So I think that as you were describing rebel, I was like, yeah, occasionally I am like that, but for the most part, I am a very disciplined human, and the inner and outer are both something I'm highly focused on, and I achieve those goals. In fact, if you put them down on paper and watch them, I'm the kind of person that leads people to them, and I spend a lot of time with the other individuals helping them find themselves or what's most important. The rebel part though is interesting because I think that, and I would imagine, is there some makeup of each? Like maybe people have a certain percentage, like in disc or some of the other things, or are they just all or nothing?
No, well, I think that you really are a core tendency, but each of the tendencies overlaps with two tendencies. So like upholders, but upholder doesn't overlap with rebels. So I want to push you a little bit on
Okay, no,
why
you
that
can
is.
push me all
Because
you want.
I'll say sometimes rebels think that they're upholders, but upholders never think they're rebels. But you're saying I want to understand what you mean by rebel. Anyway,
Let's do
but the
it.
way that they overlap is like so like upholders have a lot in common with questioners because they both readily meet inner expectations. But upholders also have a lot in common with obligers because they both readily meet outer expectations. So you can kind of tip in one direction or the other. So like a questioner like a rebel who tips to questioner is kind of like, I need to do what makes sense to me. I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm going to march to the beat of my own drum roll. A rebel who tips to obliger is much more like, you can't tell me what to do. And if you tell me what to do, I'm not going to do it. Even if I was going to do it anyway, now I won't.
That's
They
not
have
me.
much more of that spirit of resistance.
Yeah,
So
that's
when
not
you
me.
say so to be an upholder and to be a rebel, that's really not a thing. So when you say you have a dash of rebel, what do you mean by that?
I just mean I like to break things and rebuild them in my own way. And so I think at the end of the day, if I'm very independent and entrepreneurial. So sometimes rebel is a word that I tend to align with. So when you said it, I started to think that's probably me, because entrepreneurs are always this fringe kind of um, group when they're in the environment of corporate environments or some of these other in schools, for example, when you're growing up in school. But the reality is, um, being an upholder in the inner and outer and managing between those two is definitely me. And I find discipline in everything. I mean, I start my day with a morning routine every single day, and I make sure I do all those things. And
But see,
so,
Scott, this is where people like you and me get into trouble because we say to people, this is freedom. Here it is. Do it my way. I've got it figured out. If you would just do what I do, it's going to be amazing. Hey, and if you can't do it my way, I don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe you need to try harder. And then people start saying like, well, if it's easy for Gretchen and Scott, it should be easy for me. What's wrong with me? I'm not a real grown up. Maybe I have no self-esteem. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I have no willpower. And now I'm saying, there's nothing wrong with you. Whatever group you're in, there's a ton of people just
right.
like you. And sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to need outer accountability. Like it's training wheels. And I'm like, well, you do need it. And by the way, it's the biggest group of people. So like a lot of people have this, are in this situation. So just accept yourself. But I do think that upholders love to give advice, especially like with things like this, because everything we do works really well for us. And so we think we're really good at it. And it's just like, yeah, but like anything works for an upholder because that's the kind of people that we are. And I don't know if you've noticed, but most people are not upholders.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I get it. And you are further defining me as an individual. I would imagine that this is why your sister calls you the happiness bully, of course, with
Yes.
love. Is
Yes.
that why?
Yeah,
Is it
if I
part of
see
it?
that there's a way for you to get happier, I can get kind of insistent, you know, and I try not to give unsolicited advice, but sometimes it's just very hard for me because I just want to be like, oh my gosh, I can tell you how to, you know. Yes, I have really tried to hold it back a lot because I am very full of ideas.
I would imagine though, as am I. I think people come to people like you and myself for ideas, and the challenge we have is that we may not know where to stop. Like they might want you to help with one part, but maybe not all parts. And I think that's always a challenge. So
Yeah.
I get a lot of friends that'll reach out about careers and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about changing careers, and you're always so uplifting, and you make me feel good, and I know that you've done a lot of different things. These are the things I'm interested in." And I just start asking questions and building, and I will take it as far as they want me to go. I'll call people, I'll connect them with anybody. I will do anything it takes to help them get there, because I feel like if that's something, so many people are just missing that in their lives. They're just missing that cheerleader, that somebody to motivate them. Do you find yourself knowing the boundary or pushing past the boundary?
I think I know the boundary. A lot of times I'll ask, like, like I have some ideas, and I'll say something like, "As a happiness bully, I can't help but think of some things that might help. Do you want to hear them?" And some people will say, like, "Well, no, not really." And some people will say that they do. Um, it is true that often people will latch on to upholders because they see that we are very kind of effortlessly executing in a very kind of high energy, and I think what other people don't understand about upholders, particularly rebels don't understand this about upholders, is that from the outside it may look like we have lives that are very rigid and very chained and like very rote, but to us this represents freedom and even comfort. And there's interesting research which made perfect sense to me. They didn't talk about the four tendencies, but it was research showing that like they were studying patterns of behavior at students during exams, so like during a very high stress period. And what they found, and they were surprised by this, but I was not surprised, what they found is that some people's usual habits broke down. So they skipped breakfast, they didn't read the newspaper or whatever. This was a long time ago. But then what they found was that some people, their habits were even more consistent. I'm like, oh, that's the upholders, because the upholders find the routine is comforting. And so you would never say to an upholder, oh, you're under a lot of stress, you need to let yourself off the hook, don't follow your usual routine. To an upholder, that would be very unsettling. It would be more like, how can I support you in like doing all the things that you need to do to get done in your day? And then they're like, okay, like I got up at this usual time and I got my exercise and I had my cup of coffee and I did my hour of work and and that's very comforting. But other tendencies look at that and they're like, oh my gosh, you're out of your mind. Like this is so like burdensome. But it's not for us. For us, this feels good and right. But for others, like obligers, it took me a long time because I'd say things like, well, I don't want to be your babysitter. Do your work in your own way, and I'll do my work in my own way. But I'm realizing that doesn't work very well for obligers. They need accountability, supervision, deadlines, that they thrive in that,
Right.
which is why they often do really well at work because they're the ones that go the extra mile with that kind of accountability, which customers and clients and students and whatever usually and deliverables usually provide. Yeah, so it's really helpful to know how you fit in because you can see like, well, how do I make the most of my tendency, and how, if I'm experiencing some kind of limitation or weakness, can I offset it most easily?
Yeah, I feel so good when I am on schedule. I feel
Yes.
so
Oh,
aligned.
yes.
I mean, this morning I
Yes.
get up, I get in the cold plunge now. I've adjusted and adapted my schedule because I now want a cold plunge prior to the workout. And so I get in my little cold plunge and already set my cup of coffee ahead of time. So I can smell it before I go in. So now it mentally gets me prepared. And then I get out, I dry off, I have my cup of coffee, then I go outside and do my workout. And I have this whole routine. But when I get to execute it, I feel like the rest of the day is just going to be easy because I've already done these things for myself. And so that discipline does provide me the freedom. And you say this to other people and they look at you and they're like, you are crazy. You
Yes.
just woke up and you're in 38-degree water. What's wrong with you?
But see, this is the thing though, is like, it's very easy to think like, well, they just don't get it. Instead of saying like, no, I don't get it. That doesn't work for them. Like to a rebel, the idea that you would like get up every day and you've got your cup of coffee set and you're starting your day. It's like, they probably are like, why do you want to chain yourself to have it like that? Like, why would you deaden your life with such a lack of spontaneity and change? Like, we only have one life and you want to get up every day exactly the same. Like, you probably get uncomfortable when you're on vacation. You can't take your dumb cold plunge. Whereas I'm traveling the world having a million experiences. Who's right? Who's wrong?
Yeah, no one is.
Neither. Right?
Right.
But it's like because we're coming from different places. And so when you know yourself and you're like, wow, cold plunge plus coffee is the great start to my morning. And somebody else is like, I need spontaneity, I need novelty, I need change. I figure it out every day. It's like, great. That works for you.
I tried some of those other lives. And when I have the spontaneity, the spontaneity and the different days, it's just I can't find comfort.
Yep.
And so for me,
Yep.
it's about finding that comfort. The other thing I found myself doing is like, in the early part of your life, I would work, and then you come home and I would stay up watching something on TV or a show, Game of Thrones, whatever it was, like something that I
Well,
would
let's do the
binge.
tendencies of the Game of Thrones, since there's
Yeah.
so many tendencies in the Game of Thrones. If you
Oh
know
yeah,
Game of
do it. That
Thrones.
sounds fun.
Okay. Okay. Well, who are your favorite characters? Do you remember their name? Maybe you don't remember their names off the top of your head.
I'm not the greatest at that. I always liked was it Anya Stark? Was it
Okay, so this is interesting. So the interesting thing about and this is really getting into the niche of like the four tendencies in Game of Thrones. So the interesting thing about the four tendencies in Game of Thrones is like it's like in everything, people can do it in a positive, constructive way, or they can do it in a negative way. And the fascinating thing about Game of Thrones is they would show both. So Arya Stark, who's so we're going to do spoilers here. So Arya is the youngest daughter of the Stark family. She's the one that goes off. She gets trained by the Faceless Men. She's the one who, in the end, like plunges her knife into a very important place. Whatever. She's a rebel. And who else is a rebel? Cersei, the vengeful queen who's blowing up people left and right. They're both rebels. And in fact, their father, Cersei's father, Tywin Lannister, says to Arya, you remind me of my daughter, because they're both rebels. Okay, so one of the patterns that you see, a very prominent pattern in the tendencies, is if there is a rebel who's paired up either in romance or in work, they're almost always paired up with an obliger. Who's paired up with Cersei? Her brother and her lover, Jaime. Jaime Lannister is an obliger. He acts out of expectation. Okay, who else is an obliger? Jon Snow. Who else is an obliger? Daenerys Targaryen. This is a show all of the main stars are obligers, because obligers are the rock of the world. This is amazing. Obligers are often like, I don't want to be an obliger. I'm like, look at Game of Thrones. Would you be, then look, okay, and then there's something called Obliger Rebellion. That's what happens to Daenerys at the end, where she's like, I'm meeting people's expectations, and then suddenly I snap, and this I won't do. Sometimes people are like, well, I'm just not going to answer emails for 2 weeks, but she took a different turn. But then you look at the amazing upholders, Scott, the amazing upholders, Brienne of Tarth.
Yeah.
Right? So about the duty and like the honor and like following through on her word. And she meets Tywin Lannister, also an upholder. She meets Stannis Baratheon. What's the last thing he says to her? Go ahead, do your duty. A very upholder thing to say. And so, and then the rebel, and then the questioner. Well, the questioner is the imp. He's the one that's walking around being like, "Isn't there a better way to do this?"
Right.
So Tyrion is the one. Tyrion is the one. He is the questioner who says we should find a better way. This isn't the best way to run a government. This isn't the best way to run a country. I don't understand why things are this way. So anyway, once you see them, they're all over the place, and it really can make it easier, like to be parents to your kids or to deal with your boss or a client or a coworker, because you're like, oh, they just need accountability, or oh, they don't want me telling them what to do, or they just need to give me a lot more reasons for why I'm asking them to do this.
Yeah, it makes it so fun when you can see characters in shows that people watch, or,
Yes.
ways to really identify a different version
Yeah.
outside of yourself, because
Yes.
that can be challenging.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh yeah. 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 You can do. They're all over the place. It's funny. I mean, like, It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, that is like an obliger movie. Anyway, yeah, they're all
I love
they're
that movie. It's my
yeah.
favorite Christmas movie, and people argue that it's not a Christmas movie, but for me, I love the fact that and it wasn't, I guess it was released on Christmas and or re-released because it didn't do well, and that's how it became a Christmas movie. It's a really
Okay.
interesting
But
story.
Scott, see, that's interesting that you love that movie, because ever since I was a child, I've disliked that movie intensely, and I think I've only watched it through one time. Because to me, I'm like, because as an upholder, I see the Jimmy Stewart character and I'm like, why are you not upholding your expectations for yourself? Why are you constantly rushing in and picking up the slack for everybody, letting them break their word, letting them take advantage of you? To me, it's a terrifying story of someone allowing themselves to be like overmastered by others, who, if he had just said, like, what do you mean, brother? You said we were going to take turns. It's my turn. Come on. The brother would have been like, oh, okay. But if he's just like, well, if you're happy to stay, okay, I'll go about my business. I mean, anyway, don't get. And then he has Elijah Rebellion at the end, which is when he throws himself off the bridge. But fortunately, Clarence comes to save him. But again, Elijah Rebellion is when an obliger snaps because they feel exploited or taken advantage of or unheard. They feel taken advantage of, and they are taken advantage of, because upholders, questioners, and rebels, when we need somebody to go the extra mile, we always go to the questioner, the obliger, because they're the ones who are most likely to come through. I've had employers tell me they want to screen for obligers. They only want to hire obligers.
That's impressive. And I think I love movies like that because of the happy ending. He came to his
Mm-hmm.
senses. And
Yes.
so at the end of the day, I like the challenge, but I like that he finally realizes that the family is the most important thing. And, he sees the beauty in the very life that he had. And to me, sometimes that's one of the challenges we all have in seeking happiness, is we're spending so much time maybe not focused on the things that we have with gratitude and the
Mm-hmm.
the
So
positive
true.
energy, and
So
we're
true.
spending it on all of the things we don't have, or
Mm-hmm.
the things that someone else is doing. And it's such a dangerous place, and I think it's a great lead in to some of your research and some of the great books you've published, because I know you are a expert in the happiness space, talking about it all the time, helping
Yeah.
people find it. And I mean, just any thoughts on that in general?
No, I think you're exactly right. And the issue with gratitude is that it's very hard to remember to be grateful for what we have. It's like health. It's just a cliche. You've got to remember to be grateful for your health, because there are many things that we notice them when there is a problem, but we don't notice them when they're going fine. Same thing with money. If you have enough money to pay your bills, you don't think about, oh my gosh, I feel so lucky. Here I am. I can write a check to cover whatever bill I have. Whereas if you have enough, it's very easy to take that for granted or to want more. And so I think this is why there are so many gratitude practices kind of like suggested, kind of through culture and even pop culture, because we all understand how easy it is to take for granted all the things that we already have.
Yeah, and I think as we age, we have this clarity lens that's a lot easier to see it. It's
Yeah.
like that hindsight, that we're looking back on what helped make us who we are today. What are the challenges that made us stronger? And we look at it in a different direction, which I think it's really cool, because when I look at The Secrets of Adulthood, your latest book, and I look at how you break down all of these things that people can do, that are secrets, but not so secret if we just
Right.
think about them, right?
Yes. Well, my favorite kind of secret of adulthood is one where somebody would read it and they would say, oh, I've had that thought many times myself. I never quite put it into words, but yes, I think the same way. When you have that kind of shock of recognition, when you read something or somebody tells you something where you're like, oh, that illuminates my own thoughts. Like, now I understand more clearly what I've been thinking all along.
What drove you to write this latest book? What was you've had some great experience and a lot of great titles. I mean, just to name a few for our listeners, which I know that they can find them, but bestsellers: Outer Order, Intercom, The Four Tendencies, Better Than Before, The Happiness Project. I mean, these are just great titles, all of which I think you've sold over 3.5 million copies.
Hmm.
I mean, you've had great success. What drove you to the latest project?
Well, it was a couple of things coming together in my life. First of all, my daughters were like going off into the world, and I thought, well, I want to share the secrets of adulthood that I learned the hard way, through time and experience, to try to spare them some of the suffering and challenges that I went through. And also in my writing, I've written a lot, and over time I've more and more pushed myself to try to write aphoristically. And so an aphorism is kind of a general observation about human nature that's expressed in just a sentence or maybe two sentences. And an aphorism is when this is attributed to a particular person, like Mark Twain said it, or De La Rochefoucauld said it, or Warren Buffett said it, or Dolly Parton said it. That's an aphorism. In contrast to something like a proverb. And a proverb is folk wisdom, which we all know, like you can't push a rope, or one of my favorites is sailors fear fire more than water. Um, this is folk wisdom. So an aphorism is something where there's a particular person attributed to it. But so as I was writing, like I would often, just as a creative and intellectual exercise, try to, if I had a big idea that I was expressing kind of in a couple of paragraphs, I would try to see, can I just distill it into a single sentence that's just like, kind of the drop mic summary of it all, just really crystallize an idea, which is very hard. It's harder to write short than to write long. It's like that old joke. Sorry, I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter. And so sort of those two things came along: Secrets of Adulthood, and then my embrace of this kind of ancient literary form of the aphorism.
And it was, it's obviously driven in part by the fact that your family's going through a new change and
Yeah.
a new time in their life. I have two boys, 16 and 19, so
Mm.
I can relate very well to the fact that, as they go out into the world, you want to give them as much education as you possibly can, and their
Mm-hmm.
friends are always over and asking you questions, or and sometimes they ask you things that you're helping them with that your own kids don't even ask you. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
nice to have something where they can lean on, and to simplify it is a great way to connect with them, which I think is beautiful.
Well, in fact, my next book is going to be about the empty nest period, because I'm very interested in this as a forced reckoning of adulthood, which it is for many of us. Like, it's a change where we're kind of left face to face with ourselves in a new way, in kind of an unavoidable way. And, and we have a lot of life left to go. So it's a really important time to stop and reflect. Yeah.
I feel like it's the part of your life that nobody prepares you for. Like, never is there a time where I remember someone describing to me the empty nest in a way that was uh like what it actually felt like. I mean, it's so, but so my 16-year-old lives away and plays soccer for an academy and goes to board, like essentially boarding school. And so we hit it a lot earlier than we
Mm.
anticipated. So our oldest
Ah.
son went to college after our youngest son moved away. And so we go back and forth and we have a very unique life. But I say that because my wife and I found ourselves with this kind of like intro to empty nest, which was, we still have a son that we go back and forth to see, but he's very busy and there's a lot of things that happen in his life. So we are not the main characters like most parents are in that. And so I always talk about the clinking of the fork. So, we text and we talk and we have a great marriage, a great relationship. And every once in a while we'll be eating dinner and there'll be a silent moment and I hear the fork hitting the plate, and it's like a tink, tink. And it's, to me, there's an emptiness in that. And there's so much energy a year ago in that house, so much busyness, so many high fives as you're walking across, going one practice this way and the other practice that way. And nobody prepares you. And I think it's interesting because the men I talk to have never talked about it with anybody. And you mention it, and they just like immediately throw up all over their shoes. They're like, "Oh, it's the worst. I don't know what I'm doing without the kids. Like, well, I'm not going to soccer games anymore and I'm trying to find myself." And it's really a part you weren't ready for.
Well, I'm kind of glad to hear you say that, because that is exactly the book that I am writing to address. Because it's supposed to be like, how do you understand what you're going through in a way that allows you to kind of constructively deal with it, whether you're experiencing it now or whether, like, a lot of people say, like, oh my gosh, I have a first grader, but I'm already dreading it. But to dread something is not to prepare for it, but if you're like, okay, I know this is coming, like, you don't retire and then be like, okay, now what am I going to do about my retirement? It's like you're planning for that years in advance, or at least you would hope you would. And so this project is going to try to help people think about the challenges they might experience in the future or what they're experiencing now. But there's going to be a lot about fathers, because fathers are really, like more than any book that I've ever said that I was working on, people are like, oh, when is this book coming out? Because I really want this book. And a lot of fathers want it, because I think fathers don't have a good template for this, even less than mothers do. The role of fathers has changed tremendously in the last 20 or 30 years. And so, again, like, they don't have a good model in their mind. And so I think there's just a lot that is really fascinating. But I talk about the 12 changes that people experience, and what you described is the change of energy. Every person brings kind of a life force into a house, and when they go, there's the energy drops. And so if you're really experiencing that as painful, you want to think about, okay, what can I do about the energy that's around me, because I'm feeling like this drop, which can be very unpleasant. See, for some people that's wonderful. They're like, oh my gosh, the cacophony, at last it's over, I can hear myself think. Like, they're experiencing it as a positive. But if you experience it as a negative, of course you want to do something about that.
Well, there's 2 points that come to mind. Number one is, to your point about fatherhood, no one prepared us for this, because we're almost of this first generation of fathers that have been as engaged and involved as an entire population. So I'm not saying there weren't dads that were highly engaged in every aspect, but we kind of got married and everything became more equal. There was, both people working. There was equal taking care of the kids in certain ways. And by the way, when I say equal, to all my listeners, my wife was still doing the majority of the parenting when it came to the things for the kids. But I was way more involved in I went to every classroom event because my wife's a school teacher. She couldn't make it. So I was at every one of their parties so these are things my dad did not do. So when we talked about this, if I went to my dad and said, hey, gosh, I never knew how different it would feel. My dad was like completely different from my expectations and what I did and what he did.
Yeah.
Great father. No negative, just a completely different dynamic. And
1,000%. I would
that's
say
what I mean.
I have I could not have a more warmer, loving father, but it just never occurred to him. It just never occurred to anybody. But it is interesting now to grapple with that change, because, like you say, there is no model. And if men don't talk about it as much, which they tend not to talk to their friends about it as much, then they're sort of left with, like, well, how are other people dealing with this? So there seems to be, it's very, very interesting. But also, like, fathers, but then also just parents in general there's so much a deeper engagement with parents and children in general. Like, there's just so much more communication, and some people think this is for the worse, like, there's good sides and bad sides of this kind of greater connection between parents and children. But it's sort of indisputable. And so what are the consequences of that? Like, there are many consequences to that as children leave for college or the military or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, but the feeling of loss is one of them. And I think that when you're so connected to their lives, even the old way that kids played, we would go outside, we would play, we would do things. We were very independent. Our parents are very independent. So, my in-laws this past weekend, one of their kids was coming into town and they already had plans and they're going out of town, and they went out of town. And that's the independent mentality. I would say that my wife and I would probably readjust our plans because of how we've raised the kids and how connected we are. And we're still independent, but we are very engaged in wanting to be around them. And so it's going to be a great book. I know how you do your project, so it's going to be amazing, but it's a great topic to talk about. And just this weekend, I was at sand soccer here in Virginia Beach, and I saw one of the daughters of a friend of mine who had mentioned to me how deeply lost he was that his daughter wasn't going to brunch with him every Sunday. Like, he would wait for her to wake up every Sunday it was their thing. They'd go have brunch. And when I brought up how tough it was that my boys were gone, and he told me the story, and he was like, man, I find myself super frustrated, and I want to have that back. I saw his daughter, and I said, hey, I leaned down to her. I said, hey, make sure you go to brunch with your dad. He really misses it a lot. And she started laughing. She was like, oh, I know. We did have a good time. I was like, no, no, no. He lives for it. Take him to brunch when you're home, please. And she started laughing. But it is a big part of people's lives.
But
It's
so
very
here's what I would
powerful.
say as a happiness bully to that father. Think of something else you want to do on Sunday now. Be out on your mountain bike, like in the trail, or like, you've been wanting to get back into guitar, take a guitar lesson from 11 to 1, whatever. Do something different with that time, because there's nothing worse than like wandering around and seeing that empty seat at the table, or like that like neatly made bed in a bedroom. So because that's a time when you're experiencing like an acute loss, do something different with that time. And then when your daughter's back, say like, oh my gosh, let's go out for brunch, because that's our thing. But you don't need to hold that
Right.
space for it, which will always feel vacant. Like, now is the time to transform it into something else. So see, that's my happiness bully side.
There it
See,
is.
there it is. There it is. Doesn't take
It's
long.
it's good. And this was week 1 of leaving. So in his
Sure.
defense,
Well,
this was his
no,
week 1.
no.
So it
Well,
was
of
that
course.
challenge.
Well, of course, and part of love is loss. No love, no love, no love, no loss.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that empty nesting is definitely a hot topic, a phenomenal conversation, and something that helping people through it and prepare for it, because there isn't a prep, is going to be very valuable. And I can't tell you how many great conversations I've had with people where you get very deep very quickly because they're
Ah,
talking about something like that, but
so
it opens them
so
up
close to
really
their
good.
heart. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how you coach people to find themselves through that change.
And myself, for me, research is me search. And so this is like, I'm like, I got to figure this out. So I'm like, well, I'll write a book about it. That's how I usually figure out big things in my life, because otherwise it's too hard.
What did you find the most difficult? Like, what was the biggest challenge for you in that time with your schedule, or how did you cope with it?
So there were so there's 12 changes that people can experience, and some it's for the positive or the negative. And I would say the two that were most painful for me is, one, it's called the change in the season of life. This is just the recognition that the season of life is over. Like the period of my life where my daughters were like under my eye and under my roof all the time is just gone. And I love being with my young adult daughters, but I miss those little girls. And that's just the march of time. So that's the change of the season of life. And then the other is the atmosphere of growth. So the atmosphere of growth is like an element of a happy life. It's the feeling that we're happier when we're growing, and when we're making things better, or teaching, or fixing, or stretching ourselves. And the thing about children is they're an excellent source of the atmosphere of growth, because they are literally growing, and we are playing a role in that. And so we're seeing them grow and change, and it's always different, and there's always something new. And there's a lot of feeling of kind of expansion and possibility that comes from that. And if you don't have a lot of sources in your life, you can feel kind of diminished, or stagnant, when they go away. Or worse, you still depend on them vicariously. Like the friend of mine, when I said, oh, how are you doing? And she goes, oh, great. Steve just applied for medical school, and, Michael got engaged. And I'm like, I don't really care about Scott and Michael. Sorry, I've never met them. How are you? Because to her, she was still using them for her atmosphere of growth. Not that these are not big deals for a person. Like, we take great pleasure in our children's milestones, but we need to have our own sense of our own atmosphere of growth. And so for me, that's a really important thing, which is like, how am I continuing to grow and have that feeling of like forward motion in my own life? Those are the two that for me have been the biggest.
Well, it's interesting because you said it earlier a couple minutes ago when you were talking about there are good things and bad things to our deeper connection. And I admire our parents for their level of independence. As I've aged, I'm like, this is such a powerful thing. They're so happy together. They go do fun things. They have lots of friends, big community. And you see a lot of families today have a much smaller community
You
because
do.
their children
That's
are
true.
their community. And so the
No,
kids
and
leave and they're empty.
the research bears this out. that people are spending a lot more time with their children and a lot less time with their friends. And you're exactly right. And that these chickens come home to roost when the kids go, and a huge part of your social life walks out the door with them. Yep.
You do. A couple weeks ago, we went up and we had all four of us together, and we were in our Northern Virginia place, and it was the first night we're there. But one of my favorite bands was playing 20 minutes away, so I gave everybody the chance to anybody want to go with Dad, and nobody wanted to go with Dad. So I said, all right, well, I'm going, and I went out to the concert by myself. Had a great time, which I do. It's not irregular for me to do something like that because I like when I find something I really enjoy, I want to make sure I'm able to go experience it. And I went to the concert, and they came back. I came back. Everyone's asleep, and well, my oldest son's not asleep, but the other two were. And we the next morning they're asking me about the show, and I was like, it was great. Had a great time. I would have liked it if someone went with me, but because I kind of held the space for them to go with me, I didn't have time to invite anybody else. But I also don't mind going by myself. So part of the independence was I kind of booked it in the schedule. I'm going to make sure it happens. Like we talked about with upholding, it was there.
Yep.
And, but it was one of those things that you feel a slight guilt when you leave because like, oh, we're all together. But this really brings me joy. So I'm going to go do it anyway. And I'm glad I did. It was something that, but you still have that little hesitation as a parent that maybe I should spend the first night we're all together in a couple of weeks, but I did it. I made the decision, darn it. And I went with the independent decision, I guess.
Well, I have to say along those lines, one thing that I find very poignant is when people say, well, my children are my whole world. And I think, I don't know that that's very healthy. I don't know that it's good for them either. That's a lot of responsibility for a child. There's this proverb, you're only as happy as your least happy child. But if you talk to kids, you're only as happy as your least happy parent. And feeling like somebody's depending on you for their happiness is very, very weighty. And I think a lot of times children just want to go and just like focus on their friends, which is very developmentally appropriate. They don't want to be checking in all the time. And this back to this idea of like this warm and engaged. I think from talking to people, there is a sense with some people of kind of reciprocity, which is like, I'm giving you all of my time and energy. Now I'm going to every game. So my expectation is that like, that's going to be the way we are in the future. But a lot of times when you're a young adult, you really go through a period of like really wanting to be independent and really like you're really trying to build your social network among your peers, and you got a lot going on, and maybe you're not that interested in talking to your parents. And if a parent is feels extremely hurt by that, or kind of almost betrayed by that, or deeply resentful by something that you kind of would say like, is this developmentally appropriate? Probably. I mean, I'm not talking about somebody who's like not answering a text for 6 months or like whatever.
Right.
So I think you're right. It can get this feeling of like, it's okay. I don't have like, my dad isn't going to be like so sad and disappointed or stay home and sulk, or if I feel like I have to go because otherwise he can't have a good time. It's like people are like, go have a great time, Dad. Well, you'll tell us about it in the morning. It's like not everybody has to do everything at the same time. You don't have to like spend every single minute together to have a warm and engaged feeling. And the fact that you've got your own sources of happiness and energy and excitement and novelty, I mean, that's fun. It's fun when people have plans and when they're doing things and having adventures and telling you funny stories about like the crazy guy who was sitting in front of you and like, danced on his head the whole time or whatever. Like that adds life and energy to relationships. And if you just feel like somebody's waiting around all the time asking you how your day went, that can be hard.
Yeah, I look back and it's funny going back to the beginning of our conversation when you talk about the differences in the four types of personalities and having gone and been a part of it and had a great time and then coming back and sharing that joy with everybody. Some people are like, I would never go to a concert by myself. I would
Mm-hmm.
never do that. And I'm so okay with it because if it's something I really had planned and wanted to do, I'm going to make it happen and
Mm-hmm.
nothing's going to stop me. And so I have mixed friends. I have friends that are like, you went by yourself. Like, why don't you just make someone go with you? Someone in the family had to go with you. I'm like, cause I'm not convincing someone to listen to music they don't want to listen to.
Now I have
And
to ask, what band was it? I'm so
it was the
curious.
Avett Brothers. I don't know if you
Okay.
know the Avett Brothers or not, but they're kind of a mix between they're a big touring band, and it's like rock and Americana and folk and a little bit of bluegrass. And Rick Rubin produced one of their albums,
Mm.
and it's a phenomenal album, and it's the one that got the most accolades. But it's they're just a great band, and they're very
Oh,
poetic in their writing.
but this is another thing that I've noticed. I feel like I'm talking about this book that I haven't even written yet, which is,
That's
whatever. But
exciting.
this is
That's
this
kind
is
of
fun for
exciting.
me to like be talking through it. But one of the things is, I think there are people, like, one of the things that people lose is this, that is a change in a sense of identity. And I've talked to people where their sense of a loss of identity is really profound and very, very unsettling. They really are saying, like, I don't know who I am now. Like, who am I? I had a friend say, what am I for? And I was like, and this was a person who had like a thriving career and a great marriage, and but was just very, very unsettled. And in thinking about it, I think if you are a person who is experiencing this sense of loss of identity, just making like, I'm going to make a list of my 100 loves. What are 100 things that I love? And I think getting in touch with your quirks, because I think there are people who are like, they've been doing like fun for the whole family for so long, they've forgotten what's fun for them, or they've been so deferring to kind of like the group and the needs of the family that they don't even really remember what they would choose on their own. And so of course they have no sense of possibility or anticipation, because you're just lost. And something like, I love this band. You may not have heard about this band, but I know all about this band. I'm going to go to this concert by myself. It's like, this is what makes you, you. This is part of your identity. And I think if people don't have things like this, they start to feel dissolved. And so I think it's really important to be like, I really do like the Real Housewives, or like whatever it is. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, own it and let yourself feel quirky, and let yourself, like, what made you weird as a kid? Like, what was like the thing that people were like, that kid's kind of weird, that kind of weirdly into that Dungeons and Dragons or whatever it was. So that you have that, you start to build back that sense of identity. If that's something like, for me, this is not something that I felt a change in at all. I didn't experience this at all. And yet I talk to people all the time who are extremely uneasy about this change.
They're actors in the movie that is their family. Like what happens is they start to take on a role, and they
Mm.
play that role so well that they forget who they are. And I think I mean I have so many friends who do this, and then you're like, "Hey, let's go do this." And or you send Instagram messages or something back and forth, and they're like, "Oh my god, we got to get together soon." Then they never get together because there's never time outside of their structure. And it's because they are happy, but they're playing a role, and they've lost a little bit of themselves. And if you do that over time, it can be very dangerous to your own mental health and strategy. And I was in the financial industry, and I still am, but I met with clients for 23 years, and I would have conversations with people during this empty nest phase. And I have had people come in and just cry, literally husbands and wives that are just, they start to tear up and cry because their kids went to college, and they don't know, there's only 8 football games that they can go to, and their kids don't want them to come to anything but the football games, and so they don't know what to do. And another part of that is I started a practice of kind of interviewing them and asking them about what they wanted to be when they were children. And
Yes,
I'll
that's a
never
great
forget what
question.
one lady told me. She wanted to be a ballerina, and her husband looked at her and said, "I didn't even know you like ballet." And she goes, "Oh, I love the ballet." And he goes, "Well, I'll take you to the ballet." She's like, "I dreamed of being a ballerina my whole life. And here's what," and she went through these stories. They had never shared these stories together. And I mean, it was very touching to experience it, but it's also giving us a chance to really dive deep into who we are and what we want to accomplish with the next chapter, and lead our kids to show them what happiness really is, right?
Well, that's interesting, because for obligers, that's a very, very compelling argument, which is, you need to take care of yourself so that you can be a good model for your children, or so that you can take care of your children. And as an upholder, I used to really push back when people would say that, because I would say, well, no, you should do it for yourself. Like, don't do it for some kind of derivative reason. But now I realize that for many people, that is a very powerful way of thinking about it. And so if that is a very powerful way for you to frame it, then by all means, I think there are many ways to frame these, and so for, they're different ways are compelling. Um, but yeah, I think that it's a very important force reckoning. Yes, and these series of questions can be extremely clarifying.
Yeah, well, I think your next book's going to be amazing. With Secrets of Adulthood, who's the best demographic? I mean, obviously it's for everybody in every age, but where do you find the sweet spot? Is there any area that it's really been, is it early adulthood? Is it is there something that you wrote it for specifically? Is it your daughters?
I think it's mostly for people in transition or people like that feel like they're having trouble moving forward in some way. So it's like it's a lot is about like the perplexities of relationships. Like what do you I can't make friends. Like I have aphorisms about making friends, or like I can't make a tough decision. I would say one of the lines that's most quoted back to me is that if you can't figure out what to do, choose the bigger life. Because people are like, oh, because it's like the pros and the cons can feel very evenly weighed, but then it's like choose the bigger life. People are like, oh, I know what the bigger life is. Um, and so, or, so it's people who are like switching careers, or maybe they lost their job, or they're getting ready to move, or they're trying to decide like whether to break up or get engaged, that kind of thing. People graduating from high school or college or grad school or whatever. It's funny because there's a place in the back where you can write your own secrets of adulthood. Because what I've noticed is people say they don't have any of their own, but then as they read them, they're like, wait a minute, I do have my own, my thing that I say all the time, or this is what my grandfather said. You can write your own. And so how you're not supposed to give advice to your older children. You're supposed to only give solicited advice. But a friend of mine, she wrote Secrets of Adulthood for her. She bought 3 copies of the book, gave one to each child. For each one, wrote like Secrets of Adulthood, which was basically unsolicited advice for each child specifically. And then she gave it to them on Mother's Day and said, I am asking as a Mother's Day gift to me for Mother's Day immunity. And you will allow me in honor of Mother's Day to give you this advice. And they were all like, okay, you can give us the advice. And I thought that was great. I love Mother's Day immunity, because you're like, oh, there's just some things I have to say. Can I just give you a piece of advice?
I love it. We have a Sunday night dinner we do every week with our family. My mom and dad host us with my siblings and their children, and we keep coming back. And when the kids come into town, everybody comes over. And our joke is when my mom starts to tell a long story, we always say, "Mom, it's not Mother's Day," or "Mom, it's not your
Oh,
birthday." And so it's a joke that we always play with my mom. So that's really funny because that's the day that
right.
we don't
Well,
we give her less of a hard time
right, right,
out of
right.
love, of course.
Let her tell her
And
extremely
she
long
listens
story.
to all these episodes, so she's gonna hear that,
Okay,
smile and
good, good,
laugh,
good.
and then send me a text about it later, so I'll wait for the text, and I'm looking forward to it. Every time you can mention her, it's a good thing, so,
Well,
um
actually, there's something called familect, which is the language that people use within families where you have like a funny made up word for something or like an inside joke that you're perpetuating. So I'm not sure that's technically familect, but it's familect adjacent.
No, I would say our practice of nexting you is familect. So if we start to raise our hand, that means that someone's telling a story that's either getting really long or completely not interesting. And if the whole table starts to
Whoa,
raise
tough
their hand,
crowd. Wow. You literally can
it's
like heckle somebody
you
to
have to be
stop.
careful. We can't do it to my father. It does not work to my dad. And the older we get, the less we do this. This was really funny when we were in our early 30s.
Yeah.
And as our kids were kind of younger, they would start to tell a long-winded story
Yeah,
and
sure, sure,
we'd
sure.
next them as a funny joke.
Yeah.
But we'd start to raise our hand. And if my dad does one, we all kind of really lightly, for those of you listening at home, I'm just lightly raising my hand a little bit low so no one really sees it. And it's all of us identifying that we're all done with the story, but we need to keep listening. So,
It's kind of like a wrap it up, like when you're at a conference and they start like lightly playing
yes,
theme music to be like, nobody's going to come out with a hook and grab you off, but they're definitely trying to cue you to like, come on, get to the punchline.
I
Oh,
think
that's
we're a family of communicators and there's a lot of talking. And so that is it's a great strength, but it can also be a blind spot. So it's also teaching some level of social awareness to all
mm-hmm.
of us. And,
Right.
if you're telling a story, it's not
You know,
interesting. It's not an awful thing to do.
that, it's a really good idea because that is a thing that children need to learn, which is like hearing like a 20-minute rendition of the dream you had last night, or like, or this. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
What
one of my secrets of adulthood is people probably aren't as interested in your travels and in your hobbies as they pretend to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Although I am amazed at how many people watch every level of someone's life on some of the social media stuff. So it is quite interesting how some are interested in everything and others aren't interested at all. So
Well, that's another. Well, one of my secrets of adulthood is the opposite of a profound truth is also true. Often opposites are true.
yeah,
Um,
I love
but
it.
it is true. And I have a whole bunch of dark aphorisms that I didn't include in this book. And I think one of my dark aphorisms was, though it's not that dark, was something um, like the intimate details of someone else's life are surprisingly interesting. The boring but intimate details of someone else's life are surprisingly interesting. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's like listening to a couple argue in the hotel room next to you, and you're kind of
oh,
like, I kind of want to hear what's happening right now. I
oh,
don't know why,
100%.
but I
Yes.
really want to hear. Oh,
Yeah.
he's right. Oh, no, she's right. It could be really good. Well, Gretchen, I've loved talking to you. I think you are doing some amazing things, and there's no question why or how you're a 7 times New York Times best-selling author and a podcast with over 280 million downloads and all the crazy, awesome accolades that
Uh,
you have. So, thank you for joining me on the show. Thanks for giving me your time, and thanks for sharing some really cool ways that we can all be just a little bit happier every day.
oh, well, thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation so much. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.